Okay, I don't think I promised you, but I did promise myself that I was not going to jump on this bandwagon. But I didn't jump on the bandwagon, but the bandwagon was driving by slowly, so I figured, well, what the heck, why not hop up and at least have a seat on it? So here I am on the bandwagon nonetheless. It is a Glock Gen5 17. And I just want to show you real quickly how it comes in the box. And no, this isn't just going to be a boring unboxing, I hope. But just to sort of let you see exactly what you get and don't get and how it's packaged. Totally standard, standard commercial pink label version of the pistol. It comes with all of the back straps, just like the Gen 4s have been coming with. Comes with 3 magazines, like the Gen 4s have been coming with. Comes with the reloading tool, like the Gen 4s have been coming with. And basically, I could keep saying that on and on and on. So there's nothing really different or special about the packaging. The locks are orange now. So there's the in-the-box Glock 17 Gen 5. And let me take it out of the box and talk about some of the things that are the big differences, some of the things that are the little differences, and some of the things that are not different at all. Alright, let's start out with the one thing everybody wants to know. Is the trigger pull any better? Okay, so just an average of 3 pulls is 5 pounds and 3 ounces. And I've had them as light as about 4.5 pounds, but I'd say we're right in about the 5 to 5.5 pound range. So the trigger pull is about what we've come to expect from Glock, and what Glock tells us it is right on the box, 5.5 pounds. So it's actually a little bit lighter than that. But what you can't see in numbers is the smoothness of it is vastly improved over previous generation Glocks. There's a lot less grit in the trigger. So in dry fire and just sort of testing it at the bench here, it feels like a much nicer trigger. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to put people like Walther PPQ out of business or anything like that. It is not on that level at all. So people that are telling you that this is some new miracle trigger are lying to you. But for a Glock, it's a much improved feeling trigger. I'll find out how that feels when I get it out to the range. But in dry fire, it feels much improved. Okay, so as I was collecting the Glock 17 Gen 5 and thinking about how I wanted to present it to you folks, I kind of decided, after I got it back here, that the best way to do this is really going to be in 2 parts. And I hate to break video content into part 1 and part 2 separate videos, but I think in this case it makes sense. Because otherwise it's going to be a really long video, and it's going to, people that want to see range stuff are going to have to sit through a bunch of this kind of stuff, and people who want to see this kind of stuff are going to have to sit through a bunch of video of me shooting. So this way you can watch the content that means the most to you at that time. This is going to be all about the bench. So I'm going to be looking at the gun and talking about the gun right here, and we're not going to be shooting it in this video. So if the only thing you want to see is somebody shooting the gun, come back for part 2, because it'll be all about that. So what I want to talk about is the differences, or some of the key points about the Gen 5 Glock. And some of these will be specific to the 17, though most of it is the 19 and the 17 both. So first of all, the one thing you probably noticed immediately, as soon as you open the box with one of these in it, is that the finger grooves are gone. We now have a straight front strap. I know for a lot of people, the finger grooves has been a big deal. It was never a real big deal to me, and so I guess it fit my hand okay. But I can certainly understand where, if it didn't fit your hand well, those would be very annoying. I will say that even though the finger grooves have never really bothered me, picking this one up without them does feel immediately better. So for those people who are already, the guys and girls that already like the way a Glock feels in your hand, I don't think it's going to make it worse. I think if anything, it's going to make it better. We still have the same grip angle. We still have the same hump in the back. Okay, the other thing you notice right away is ambidextrous slide stop, slide release control. And mechanically, it looks like it should be a good one. It looks like it is definitely a full ambidextrous control, meaning the part is made so that both sides function with equal strength and do equal work. So this should be a really nicely functioning ambidextrous control. I'm going to test that in live fire. Another important key topic is the magazines are compatible. I'm given to understand that there are some very minor differences between them, but those differences are so small that they don't change the compatibility. If anything, I think it might just be the base plate. Base plate looks like it's shaped a little bit differently. And I do have previous gen right here, so you can see that. You can see that there's an extended lip on the base plate. Let me put, what's the best way to show you this? Oh, here we go. All right, so you can see on my left hand is the new one, Glock, the Gen 5, and on my right hand is the Gen 4. You can see there's a bit of an extended lip, and that is to correspond with this huge semicircle notch that is out of the front. And the idea is that this gives you somewhere where you can, if you have a magazine that doesn't want to drop free, or you've maybe got some kind of malfunction, the magazine is being sort of bound up in the gun, that you can get in there and, you know, get a thumb in there and rip that thing out. So that's what that's for. Otherwise, the magazines are fully compatible, backward compatible. So any Gen 4 magazines, and probably most, if not all, Gen 3 magazines, if you're right-handed, that caveat, will work. Okay, everybody's talking about an improved trigger. My numbers have shown me that the trigger is at least as light as any Glock, and I usually read my trigger, my Lyman trigger gauge usually reads Glock triggers at about 6.5 to 7 pounds, and this one was reading this one much lighter. So I'm thinking this, you know, in practice might be as much as a pound lighter, probably half a pound lighter, but it feels much crisper and much smoother. So I do like the trigger so far. Time will tell. Range work will definitely tell. Another thing to do with the magazines and the change for Gen 5 is this flared out magwell. You can see there's actually a flare to the outside of the pistol. If we hold it this way, put it against my hand there so you can see it. You can see the flare. And if we turn it this way, get a little light in there, you can see it is definitely pretty well flared. Magazine catch is the same size, same location. It is swappable, left hand or right hand, but it is not ambidextrous. The new finish on the Glock Gen 5 is interesting looking. It's more of a jet black in appearance, and it has more of a sheen to it. Definitely shinier and smoother. It is a nitride type finish in appearance, and the process supposedly is something called NDLC, not to be confused with Run DMC, but I have absolutely no idea what that means. You know, it sounds like somebody in marketing got to name it, and they had a good friend in engineering that helped them out. But it's basically a nitride type of finish, and it is different. It certainly is different. You notice it right away. So, distinguishable new finish. Okay, for demonstration and illustration, here's 3 slides, 3 generations. Up top, Gen 3 Glock 17. In the middle, Gen 4 Glock 34, because I don't have a 17, but they are identical other than the length of the barrel and the length of the slide. And then down bottom, the Gen 5 Glock 17. So the key differences that are visible at this point with just taking the slide off are, number one, you can see obviously from Generation 3 we went to from a straight recoil spring and guide rod to the dual recoil spring and guide rod, and we still maintain that same configuration, but significant difference here is the length of the recoil spring and guide rod assembly. So if you look at the barrel lugs, I think we'll find this is really the key. So if I sort of draw a line here with this pointer, you can see that Generation 3 and Generation 4, the barrel lug was identical. And those barrels can be interchanged. But, oops, we come down here to Generation 4, and it's not. And that really kind of correlates or corresponds to the recoil spring assembly. You can see that's a big difference between Gen 4 and Gen 5 on that dual recoil spring assembly. That's a good 1/4 of an inch difference. My understanding, and I don't know this firsthand, I'm just subject to knowing what the rumors and little reports that have been flying around in bits and pieces, but my understanding of the reason for this is so that the Glock 19 and Glock 17 can share the same components and share the same locking block, and so they moved the 17 to accommodate that. That's my understanding of why this has been changed. But regardless of why it's been changed, you can see that they are not compatible. You cannot interchange the barrels between the Gen 4 and the Gen 5, nor can you interchange the recoil spring and guide rod assembly. So, very significant difference there. One other difference, and we will look closer at this one. Firing pin safety block has gone from the traditional round plunger that it's been forever to the Glock 42, Glock 43 style firing pin safety block. Functions basically the same way, it's just got a lot more intricate cuts in it and certainly a different shape to the outside. It has to be reassembled in one direction versus any direction, things like that. We'll look closer at that in a close-up. Okay, now let's take a closer look inside the slide and look at some things that are different. So the barrel looks pretty similar. It's Glock barrel shaped, right? We talked about the locking lug being in a different configuration, different location than previous generation, so the barrel is not compatible in that respect. But one of the things I noticed almost instantly when I pulled this barrel out of the slide was the quality of the finish. Glocks, to me, are kind of notorious for getting those smiley faces all over them. I mean, even the factory test firing usually leaves them scratched up. And this one is almost Sig Sauer quality. Really nice finish on this barrel, and it looks like it may be very durable. So anxious to see that. Now the other big difference, the real true difference here, is the rifling. Glock has replaced the polygonal barrel rifling with a more traditional lands and grooves, which kind of goes against everything they've preached all these years. And they say that this gives you better accuracy, although I remember that they used to always say that the polygonal barrel gave you better accuracy. There's also a pretty nice crown, you can see it there, in this barrel. So it's interesting. They do say, for whatever reason, let me shine my light down this way. You can see that crown. They do say that this barrel is more accurate. So probably not in my hands, but maybe in somebody else's. Let's take a look at some of the other parts. So that's the barrel. And it looks promising in terms of nice durable coating, and I'm very anxious to see how it shoots with that rifling. And since it does have conventional lands and grooves, you should be able to shoot uncoated lead projectiles through this barrel. Okay, moving on. Okay, so you can see here the difference in the finish. Maybe you can't see it too much. It may not be too obvious depending on the way the camera is going to pick that up. But this is the Gen 4, and this is the sort of the early Gen 4, where it still had that good Tenifer finish on it. And this is the Gen 5, and the Gen 5 now has this new finish, which is this NDLC finish. that is basically looks like a black tenifer, and it appears to be something that might be very durable. So I'm anxious to see how this holds up over time, especially on the barrel. But let's look inside the slide at some of the components that may or may not be different. All right, here is the Gen 4 striker, the firing pin. You can see the firing pin is sort of that blade style that we're very familiar with. And you can see the shoulder there. All right, now here's the Gen 5 firing pin and striker. More of the what I kind of call the chisel style firing pin, and you can see a lot of differences to the shoulder as well, because it's going to interface with that new firing pin safety block, which is a whole different type of design. So differences in the firing pin certainly mean not compatible, not interchangeable. Spring cups are identical, and it looks like the springs are the same spring. I don't see any physical difference there, and usually when Glock changes a spring, they're going to change something visual about it, like the color, go from silver to a gold or something like that, and everything else looks the same. So differences are all basically right up here. Okay, talked about the firing pin safety block. That's this in a Gen 4 and previous Gen 3 it was the same part. Right, we're used to all seeing that. This is the part you see in the slide. This is the part that's inside. Alright, now the Gen 5 looks like this. Yeah, you see there for comparison. I'm not going to get into the weeds on how that works, but you can see they are certainly not compatible. Extractors. This one, I don't know, I've looked at this one pretty close and I see some subtle differences, but it looks like you could interchange them. However, I don't know if you interchange them if you might be introducing an opportunity for malfunctions. There are some subtle differences between them. This is the Gen 4 and this is the Gen 5, and you can see mostly in this, on this side of it is where you can really see the subtle differences between the two. Now on my Gen 4, you know, this could just be wear, because this is out of my Glock 34 and it has seen a lot of rounds through it. So that could just be wear. So I'm not going to say that there's a difference there, but there's certainly some differences in here. So again, you might be able to interchange them. The parts may fit and they may even function, but I don't know if they're going to function as designed. So kind of a question mark there. Extractor depressor plunger from the Gen 4 and the new one from the Gen 5. They look to be the same, however, the spring is slightly differently colored, and that is usually significant in Glock world. They don't usually change the color of the spring for no reason. So the polymer bushing also seems to be the same, but I'm not going to swear to it. But it does look like the same part, that polymer bushing. But I think the spring is different. Probably you could interchange these parts and they may work okay, but again, if we were able to compare part numbers, we might see that spring is different. Again, Gen 4 here on the left, Gen 5 on the right. And last but not least, Here is our end cap for the Gen 4. We're used to seeing that. We're used to seeing this odd shaped hole on the right back of the pistol, right? But the Gen 5 now is shaped differently. So that hole is now a big square. It's almost symmetrical to the other side, but it's not quite. But definitely a difference, and not compatible, not interchangeable. Okay, taking an overview look at the frames between the Gen 4, which is here on the top, and the Gen 5 here on the bottom. Let me just point out the key differences, and then we'll detail it and take a closer look at the components. But one key difference is the locking block. The locking block is a total different design. You can see, obviously, there's a big dimensional difference here. So obviously this different dimension correlates to the lug on the barrel, and that's why the barrels are no longer compatible between Gen 4 and Gen 5. Another major difference obviously is the ambidextrous slide stop, slide release control here on the Gen 5 versus the single on the Gen 4. It also uses a different type of spring rather than the wire spring, which I'll show you in close-up. It uses a coiled spring. Trigger bars are different. They are similar but different. You can see that here. We'll also take a look at that in close-up. And back in the back, the fire control group has been completely changed. It may look a little similar at this level, but it's really not. The cruciforms are different, the connectors are different, and the trigger springs are different. You know, that whole trigger spring mechanism is different, and we'll take a look at that in close-up as well. Okay, another difference that really can only be seen in good close-up, and I put a white paper underneath for good contrast here, so you can see that the slide lock on the Gen 4 uses that little piece, that little piece of spring steel right there. The way we would take that down was push on it with our Glock tool, and then we would pull the lock out. On the Gen 5, they have moved to a coiled spring underneath the slide lock, just like the Glock 42 and Glock 43. So it's not that we haven't seen this before. We do not have our spring here, our flat spring. Right? So you would use a small screwdriver or something to just get in there and push down on that spring to pull out the slide lock. Okay guys, I don't want to try and geek out on you too much here, but just want to show differences in the frame of the pistol between the Gen 4 and the Gen 5. Okay, starting with the slide stop. This is the Gen 5, and you can see that it has the trapped coil spring, and basically this is the same type of design that the Glock 42 and 43 use, except they've incorporated it into an ambidextrous, but it is one bar. So when you lift up on either side, you are doing the same exact job. And here's the tab that's going to interact or interface with, might as well show you. Here's our follower on the magazine, and here's the tab that the magazine follower pushes up to lock the slide for us. On the Gen 4, the traditional, this is the extended slide stop, but the traditional single side slide stop with the wire spring that goes underneath the locking block pin here, and then goes through the trigger pin goes through it there. Okay, next the locking block itself. This is the Gen 5 locking block. It is again redesigned and unique, not the same part and not compatible. And to make this one easier, compare them this way. So we've got Gen 4 here on the right, Gen 5 on the left, and you can see there are some design differences. Okay, trigger bar, Gen 5. Gen 5 trigger bar starts up front with our trigger, which looks exactly the same and functions exactly the same, but then we move back into our bar. Okay, this post interfaces with the firing pin safety block up in the slide. That's what pushes that up and out of the way so that our firing pin can go forward, in case you didn't know what that does. But you can see the different design in the trigger bar, and I'll show side by side here in a sec. And then here's the cruciform, which is also very different. Okay, and we can see our part number there. We're looking at it upside down, but it is, come on, there we go, 39701. Alright, that's Gen 5. Now let me just put Gen 4 here. So Gen 4, we have that dimple on the trigger bar. You can see the difference there. Dimensionally, they're the same. They hit the same reach. But you can see we get back to the tail, where we go into our fire control group in the rear. A little different configuration. Cruciforms are very different. I know they look similar. They're both still cruciforms, but they are very different. Not compatible, not interchangeable. Alright, here are the two connectors. This is the Gen 5 on the left and the Gen 4 on the right. And you can see that the Gen 4 is a dot connector because it came out of a 34. But this one also looks like it has a teeny tiny little dot right there. Look at just above, or just, wait, hold on. Just above that red pointer, that right there, it looks like a tiny little dot. And I can't tell if it's an intentional dot. The angle looks the same on both parts of the connector. Up here at the business end, which is this top, all the other dimensions look the same. I don't see any real significant differences. Try and look at them top down. They really do look like the same part. I've heard both ways. I've heard that they are backward compatible and that they're not backward compatible. Once again, everybody's an expert, right? So I'm going to try not to do that to you. I'm not going to tell you something I don't know. But we can look at it together. That's all we can do. Gen 4. Gen 5. See that little dot? I would not be afraid to try interchanging these. I don't see any significant difference between them. And last, the trigger spring. So here's the trigger spring. Come on. There's the trigger spring for the Gen 4. I've left it captured on the cruciform rather than unhook it. That's just our little S coil spring, right? For the trigger in the rear fire control group. Gen 4. Gen 5, we have this type. We have this spring that's captured on this little polymer rod, and it has part of the cruciform connector on it. And again, this is Glock 42, Glock 43 technology. So if you're familiar with that, then you know how that works, and hopefully you know how to remove it and replace it. So again, and that goes in here, and that is going to be also the difference between that. Let's get a focus. That's also the difference between these two housings. You see one on the left, which is Gen 5, has the cutouts to accept that captured trigger spring, and Gen 4 does not. Okay, the Gen 5 Glock 17, all back together, function tested, no spare parts. She ought to be good. So, next step in part 2, we'll be getting this thing out to the range and shooting the heck out of it. But I think we've looked at most of the things that are different, and we can see that it is a considerable number of changes between Gen 4 and Gen 5. It is not just, oh look, they removed the finger grooves and they painted the slide a slightly different color. It goes way deeper than that. Hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that to you and show you what is different and what's not. But mostly everything's different. The sights are the same, if that helps.